Welcome back, ladies, gentlemen, and NBs, and thank you for tuning back into St. Andrew TV, a cure for your Monday blues. I am your host, Andrew, and today we are going over something that some people who have been around Old West firearms before might already have a clue, but for those of you who are just getting integrated with the Old West, we are going to cover this iconic noise. You hear it? That's right, we are going to cover the 4 clicks of a Colt single action army. We are going to go over what each individual click means and all the little parts and pieces that are moving to make this thing eventually go boom. The disclaimer before this video even starts is if you have a hunch that something internally is not working with any firearm, let alone a Colt single action army, please don't do anything with it. Please don't fire it. Please don't even load it. You know, too many things can go poorly if something's worn out, a spring's busted, or a mechanism's just shot. It's not worth it. Safety first here on St. Andrew TV. Speaking of safety first, we're going to actually put this into half cock, which is one of the things we'll cover, and check if it's unloaded, which mine is. So with that being said, we are going to start with the hammer in what we call resting position. This is not a click per se, but this is probably the position the hammer will be in as you store it, or it's sitting in your holster down here. This is probably where you are going to have the hammer, which leads us to click number 1. As you can see, the hammer comes back a little bit, and there's a little gap in between the firing pin and what could potentially be inside the cylinder. This first little click is called the safety notch, and theoretically, you pull that firing pin back and it's not resting on a live primer. In practice, it's probably better to do the old cowboy load, which is load 1, skip 1, then load 4, so the firing pin is resting on an empty chamber. However, that is click number 1 for a Colt single action army. That is the safety notch. Click number 2. You heard me say it earlier when I say check your firearms to make sure they are unloaded. This is click number 2, otherwise known as half cock. This releases the locking bolt down here from all the locking notches, and that allows your cylinder to move freely. This is also the prime opportunity to load and unload your weapon because you can rotate the cylinder. With the locking notch disengaged, that is what allows the cylinder to rotate, and you can put cartridges in or you can take cartridges out. Click number 3. You just saw a little bit of what makes click number 3 very interesting, because once you hear that third click, the hammer actually goes back up into half cock. However, there is something that happens when you hear that third click. Remember that locking bolt I was telling you about? Well, that's where the locking bolt re-engages, and then you can spin the cylinder just a slight bit until it gets into one of these notches here on the side. Now this cylinder is locked up. This is the mechanism that re-engages the cylinder to make sure that there is a chamber ready for that firing pin to come down on when you get into the full cock position, which is what we will cover next. To better illustrate what I am talking about, I disassembled my U-Birdie, which only has 3 clicks, but the second click you will hear is doing exactly what the third click of the Colt single action army is doing. So that's half cock on the U-Birdie, which allows it to move freely, the cylinder that is. And then here is the third click on a Colt single action army, the second click you'll hear here. And as you can see there, this locking bolt actually came up and now it is firm. That is what catches the notch and holds that cylinder in place, ready for that firing pin to come back down and strike a live primer, sending a bullet out of your barrel. This is now very firm, and this is where we start having fun. The fourth and final hammer position that your single action army will have is full cock. This is the final place before you are ready to fire. Now, a couple things do happen in this particular instance. Remember when I could rotate the cylinder and have that bolt find a notch on the third click? Well, this one actually makes sure that the bolt down here catches a notch, and that is what ensures that there is a primer at the end of this firing pin down here when you pull this trigger. You'll also notice when you pull it back into full cock that the trigger will move and get set for you to pull it. That will cause the hammer to release and come up, and the firing pin will hit that primer. Now, when you pull it back into full cock like so, this becomes very, very sensitive. It doesn't take that much force to pull and fire. And that's not to say out of any position you can't get back into resting, but you can't get back into resting until it goes all the way back down. This trigger will not release. So my best advice, if you want to bring the hammer back up into resting without firing around, is to grab that hammer firm with your thumb, put your finger on the trigger, and as you cock that hammer back, the trigger will disengage and it will come back as if you were firing, and lightly bring that hammer back up into a resting position. And that concludes the 4 clicks of a single action army. 1, 2, 3, 4. It also spells Colt if you really think and use your imagination. C-O-L-T for those who don't know how to spell Colt. This is kind of second nature of what everything kind of means in terms of what the firearm is doing in each particular motion. The third click I actually looked up to make sure that I was correct in my hypothesis. I figured that the bolt went up into a notch to secure everything in place, and then once you get that final click, it's party time. But that's all there is to it. I hope for the newcomers you learned a little thing about some Old West firearms today. And for the people who already knew what I was talking about, I hope it was a good refresher of your memory, so to speak. Please leave a like if you've enjoyed today's video, or leave me a comment stating what you liked, or tell me what I should do next. I have opened up a Patreon, and that has actually been open for a few months now. I take pride in being community funded and community funded only. For myself and everybody else involved with St. Andrew TV, we are pretty adamant about never taking sponsorships here on this channel. We don't want external forces influencing the content in either which direction. Everything you see is organic and homegrown. But in the same note, please do not feel obligated to donate to the Patreon, only if your means allow you to do so. The content on YouTube will forever remain free. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed as of late, but for those of you who have come across this channel or this video because you like Old West firearms, maybe you like gunsmithing and I was just refreshing your memory a little bit. Or maybe you caught this beautiful Civil War era neckerchief from the state of New Hampshire and thought, hey, he looks pretty dapper in that. Think about hitting that subscribe button, because you're a daisy if you do.